The Unfiltered Human on the Fringe episode 57 Control as Culture Surveillance, Safety Obsession, Technocratic Order. Welcome back to the Unfiltered Human on the Fringe. Control used to be obvious. It looked like authority figures, visible rules, and the clear boundaries of law and order. But in today's world, control has changed shape. It doesn't arrive as chains, it arrives as culture. We live in a time where surveillance is normalised, safety is idolised, and technocratic order is sold as progress. Cameras on every corner, data harvested from every click, rules framed as protection, all of it stitched into the fabric of daily life. On the surface, it looks like care. Who wouldn't want safety? Who wouldn't want predictability? But beneath the reassurance lies a quieter truth. The more we organise around safety and efficiency, the less space we leave for freedom, unpredictability, or human messiness. In the Inversiverse, I spoke about how control doesn't always require force. Sometimes it only needs compliance. And compliance is easiest to achieve when it feels like culture. When the cage doesn't look like a cage at all, but like protection, like convenience, like the natural way things are. This episode is about that shift, about how control has moved from command to culture, from external imposition to internalized norm. We'll explore how surveillance is sold as safety, how technocratic systems shape our choices without asking, and how the obsession with control bleeds into every corner of our lives. And the question we'll return to again and again is this: if control has become culture, what does it mean to live freely in a world that calls freedom dangerous? Let's begin. The promise of safety control rarely arrives in chains. It arrives as comfort, as promised, as reassurances that if we follow the rules, we will be safe. In childhood, this takes the shape of protection, a parent holding your hand while you cross the street. Necessary, loving, real, but the same impulse can also smother. Too much protection begins to feel like mistrust, like being kept fragile instead of being made resilient. At the cultural level, this pattern magnifies. Safety becomes not just a value, but a god. Every risk must be managed, every danger prevented, every behavior monitored, not always for harm, but for the illusion of certainty. And once safety is enthroned, freedom quietly steps aside. Themes 1. Safety as virtue. We are taught to equate safety with goodness. The safest choice becomes the right choice. Risk becomes irresponsible. But without risk, growth collapses. 2. Infantilization through protection. Just as children overprotected by anxious parents struggle to develop independence, societies smothered by a safety-first culture risk losing their resilience. 3. Safety as control. Safety narratives often mask control. Rules framed as protection also enforce compliance. The order wears the mask of care. Attributes: predictability, the comfort of knowing nothing unexpected will happen. Comfortable dependence, trading autonomy for reassurance. Illusion of certainty, mistaking control for protection. Smothered growth, safety taken too far limits resilience and agency. The seduction of safety, the story of safety is seductive. Who doesn't want protection? Who doesn't want to feel shielded from danger? But beneath the promise is a paradox. Safety protects, but it also constrains. It nurtures, but it also smothers. And when it becomes the highest cultural value, it quietly redefines freedom as recklessness. We saw this most clearly during the COVID years. Protection was the watchword. Every new rule, every new measure, every new surveillance justified as safety. But as time passed, many realized that safety had expanded beyond shielding from a virus. It had become a new cultural norm. Every risk, every freedom, every decision reframed through the lens of control, disguised as protection. Personal reflection. For me, the numbness I felt in recent years wasn't from not speaking, but from speaking and being dismissed. The same happened around safety culture. I would point out that rules framed as protection often went further, shaping behavior in ways that had little to do with real danger. Yet the response was often, "But it's for your safety." That phrase carried a weight. It closed the conversation. It framed any challenge as reckless, any doubt as dangerous. I recognized the same tone from childhood when questioning rules wasn't seen as curiosity, but as defiance. Safety was the shield adults used to mask control. And in adulthood, I've seen it again, at scale. The same dynamic, only now it isn't parents, it's governments, corporations, systems. and the same exhaustion emerges when pointing it out, the silence that follows when recognition never comes. Psychological insight. At the individual level, attachment research shows how overprotective parenting can undermine resilience. Children shielded from every risk develop more anxiety, not less, because they never learn to regulate uncertainty. At the group level, social psychology points to the risk society described by Ulrich Beck, a modern condition where managing risks becomes a cultural obsession, and collective life revolves around avoiding harm rather than pursuing possibilities. At the societal level, Michel Foucault's concept of biopower reveals how states manage populations through the regulation of health, safety, and risk. Safety becomes the moral framework through which compliance is enforced. These perspectives reveal that safety is never neutral. It shapes identity, behavior, and culture, sometimes protecting, but often constraining. Embodiment prompt or practice. Think of a time someone told you, "It's for your safety." Notice what your body felt in that moment. Did you feel reassured, or did you feel controlled? Where does that sensation live in you now? Insight prompt. What risks in your life were worth taking, even when they were labeled unsafe? What did those moments teach you about the limits of safety first thinking? Integration moment. Safety protects, but safety also smothers. When it becomes the ultimate cultural value, it transforms freedom into recklessness and risk into sin. Recognizing this paradox doesn't mean rejecting safety altogether. It means asking, when does protection end and control begin? Seed to plant safety is precious, but it is not absolute. A life lived only for safety is not safe, it is small. The normalization of surveillance once looked like towers, uniforms, or flashing blue lights. It was overt, and because it was overt, people could see it as control. Now it has slipped into the background, hidden in convenience, disguised as care. Cameras are everywhere, phones are always listening, and algorithms are constantly interpreting. But the shift is not just technological, it is cultural. Surveillance has become so normalized that we no longer notice it. Worse still, we defend it. We repeat phrases like, "If you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear." We celebrate convenience without questioning the cost. This section explores how surveillance moved from the periphery to the center, from external authority to internalized habit. Themes. The panopticon, made personal. Michel Foucault's panopticon was a prison where inmates behaved as if always watched, even if no one was in the tower. Today, surveillance has been privatized and personalized. The panopticon sits in our pockets. We don't just act as if we're watched, we are watched. Convenience as the Trojan horse. Surveillance doesn't arrive as a threat, it arrives as help. We trade privacy for personalization, freedom for efficiency. We don't resist because we like the convenience. Watching as caring. Surveillance is framed as safety. Cameras prevent crime, data protects health, and monitoring prevents harm. But the safety story often masks control. It's not about care, it's about compliance, cultural blindness. What once looked like an intrusion has become invisible through repetition. A camera that once seemed alien now blends into the scenery. Speech that once flowed freely is now softened, edited, and self-policed. Attributes. Unseen gaze, constant observation, whether or not we notice. Voluntary compliance, handing over data in exchange for ease. Care as control, protection used as justification for power. Self-surveillance, people editing themselves before anyone else does. Democratic disguises, control framed as progress, safety, or freedom. The industrial complex. The strangest truth about surveillance is that we now participate in it willingly. We carry the panopticon in our pockets. We scroll, click, and share, leaving trails of data that are analyzed, packaged, and monetized. We give away our choices and then thank the system for the personalized results. But surveillance is not only technological. I noticed, even as a child, the rise of what I can only call linguistic surveillance. In the late 80s and 90s, as the UK aligned more closely with European Union governance, language began to feel policed. People said things like, "Oh, you can't say that now," or "I shouldn't be saying this." Conversations became littered with self-censorship, not because police were listening, but because cultural policing was taking root. What shocked me most was the nervous system's response. I would watch people tense up, crash, or even snap into anger when a single word triggered them. The dialogue wasn't about the overall meaning anymore. A stray word could activate survival mode, shutting down all capacity for debate or resolution. It wasn't surveillance through cameras. It was surveillance through language, through conditioning, through fear of being misunderstood. This, too, is surveillance, the monitoring of thought, of speech, of expression. And when combined with cameras, algorithms, and institutions, it creates a total environment. An environment where not only are we watched, but we begin to watch ourselves. Personal reflection. I remember the rise of CCTV in my town in the late 80s and early 90s. At first, there was only one, a massive camera bolted onto a building in the middle of the high street. It protruded outwards, heavy and obvious, casting a black shadow across the sky when you looked up. Compared to today's discrete models, it was enormous. It felt alien, mechanical, almost threatening. Then came more. One became many, and soon cameras blended into the scenery. Now they're everywhere, and people barely notice. But every time I pass one, something in me whispers, who do they think they are to watch us like this? It's always sold as safety, yet I've seen the contradictions. Crimes caught on camera can still go unpunished. Evidence can be dismissed, inadmissible. A system that claims to protect doesn't always protect. Safety, I realized, is the story, not the substance. The same contradiction appeared in politics. I remember Ireland's referendums on joining the EU. The people said no, but the EU and supportive Irish politicians didn't accept the voice of the people. They pushed for another vote, and when that failed, they pushed again. If democracy is supposed to mean listening, then why was no treated as the wrong answer? As a child, I didn't have the words for it, but I could feel it. Exhaustion being used as a weapon. Repeat the process until people give up, until they're worn down, until the result matches the system's desire. That's not democracy. That's coercion wrapped in procedure. It struck me then, and it still strikes me now. Surveillance isn't just cameras. It's the conditioning of thought, the manipulation of voice, the erosion of trust. And the worst part, people become too tired to fight it. Psychological insight. At the individual level, the panopticon effect shows how behavior shifts under the possibility of being observed. People become self-conscious, restrained, and less authentic. Even suspicion of a gaze is enough to create compliance. At the group level, the normalization of deviance explains how small intrusions gradually become accepted norms. Each camera, each new rule, each linguistic restriction seems minor until the total produces a culture of constant surveillance. At the societal level, Zuboff's surveillance capitalism and Stanley Cohen's work on denial reveal the mechanics of systemic control. Surveillance isn't just about crime or safety. It's about mining human behavior for profit and about shaping populations through exhaustion and repetition. And politically, the Irish referendums on the EU prove how democracy can be used as theatre. The first vote on the Nice Treaty 2001 and later the Lisbon Treaty 2008 were rejected. Both were followed by second referendums after campaigns of pressure and reframing until the yes vote was secured. Consent was not respected, it was manufactured. This pattern is the same at every level. Surveillance and control wear the mask of safety, democracy, or progress, but behind the mask is persistence, manipulation, and the silencing of dissent. Embodiment, prompt, or practice. Think back to a time you silenced yourself because you thought, I can't say that now. Notice how your body felt. Did your breath tighten? Did your shoulders contract? Let yourself feel where in your body the fear of being observed or misunderstood lives. Insight prompt. When have you witnessed double standards in safety or democracy? A rule or a process that claimed to protect, but clearly served power. How did that recognition change how you trusted the system? Integration moment surveillance thrives not by force, but by exhaustion, by repetition, by normalization, by teaching us to police ourselves before anyone else does. Integration means naming this dynamic clearly. What we call safety, democracy, or culture may actually be surveillance, and once we name it, we can choose how to respond. Seed to plant surveillance is more than being watched. It is learning to watch yourself until silence feels safer than truth. The psychology of control at its core is not just political, it is psychological. The same impulses that drive an anxious child to cling to routine or a traumatized adult to micromanage their environment are the very impulses that scale up into cultural systems of governance. Control feels safe, control feels protective, control feels necessary. But when protection hardens into obsession, safety transforms into suffocation. What begins as order collapses into a cage. This is the paradox of control. It is born of fear, yet it creates more fear in return. Themes 1. Anxiety as architecture. Control is rooted in anxiety. When the unknown feels unbearable, order is imposed. From an individual with obsessive routines to governments with rigid policies, the logic is the same. Uncertainty must be eliminated. 2. Trauma's blueprint. Trauma narrows tolerance. A nervous system that has been hurt becomes hypervigilant, clinging to certainty. Cultures do the same. History's wounds create societies obsessed with risk management and surveillance. 3. Control versus chaos. At both micro and macro levels, chaos is framed as the enemy. But chaos is also where creativity, intimacy, and life itself arise. Systems that suppress chaos suppress vitality. 4. Illusion of mastery. Control promises mastery, but mastery over life is impossible. The more tightly it is gripped, the more fragile it becomes. Control breeds its own collapse. Attributes rigid routines, repetition as comfort, whether in habits or policies. Hypervigilance, scanning for threats, reacting to potential danger before it happens. Fragile authority, systems that appear strong but break when unpredictability intrudes. Recursive fear, control generates the very fear it claims to solve. The pain of micromanagement. I've seen how control grows from fear. On an individual level, I've watched people cling to strict schedules, rituals, and routines because the unknown feels unbearable. On a group level, I've seen how entire communities reinforce silence because speaking openly feels unsafe. And at the societal level, control theory itself shows us that systems designed to maintain equilibrium become fragile when they overcorrect. When governments micromanage behavior in the name of safety, when technocratic orders suppress unpredictability, the result is not resilience, it is brittleness. Game theory adds another layer. In repeated games, players often adopt strategies of dominance or compliance depending on perceived threats. When applied to culture, this becomes the endless cycle. Authority enforces control, citizens comply out of fear, the system interprets compliance as legitimacy, and the cycle repeats. Yet beneath it all lies fragility. The moment one actor defects or resists, the illusion of total order fractures. Control, whether personal or political, is not a strength. It is fear wearing the mask of order. Personal reflection. I've lived this dynamic in my own nervous system. After trauma, I found myself drawn to control, not always in obvious ways, but in subtle ones, over-preparing, scanning, trying to stay 3 steps ahead. It gave me the illusion of safety. But inside, I knew it was anxiety disguised as discipline. The same feeling rises when I watch governments frame every policy around protection. I can sense the hypervigilance beneath it, the refusal to trust uncertainty. It's as if whole nations are operating with traumatized nervous systems, locked in fight, flight, or freeze, unable to tolerate the unpredictable. And I felt the grief of watching it play out around me. Friends triggered outrage with single words. Communities collapsing into silence for fear of speaking. Systems repeating votes until exhaustion brings compliance. These are not signs of resilience. They are symptoms of collective trauma being managed through control. Psychological insight. At the individual level, trauma theory, Bessel van der Kolk, shows how a nervous system narrows after hurt, clinging to predictability and suppressing chaos. Obsessive behaviors, avoidance, and rigid routines are survival strategies. At the group level, Goffman's dramaturgical theory reminds us that people manage impressions, censoring themselves to avoid social punishment. When fear of chaos dominates, entire communities begin to perform compliance, editing out authenticity. At the societal level, Foucault's biopolitics explains how states extend this same psychological logic to populations, managing health, risk, and behavior under the guise of protection. The European Union's persistence in rerunning Irish referendums until the right Outcome emerged is a textbook example of control masquerading as democracy. Control theory itself offers critical insight. The harder a system works to maintain stability, the more fragile it becomes. Like an overprotected child, a micromanaged society becomes less resilient to disruption. Embodiment prompt or practice think of a routine or habit you cling to for safety. Now imagine it breaking, the bus is late, the meeting is cancelled, the plan disrupted. Notice how your body responds. Tightness, agitation, collapse. Recognize that this micro response is the same blueprint societies follow at scale. Insight prompt. Where have you seen safety obsession become suffocating? In your own life, in your community, or in your nation? How did you recognize that the pursuit of control was no longer protection, but paralysis? Integration moment. The psychology of control is rooted in fear, fear of chaos, fear of uncertainty, fear of vulnerability. But chaos and uncertainty are also the conditions for creativity, intimacy, and life. Integration means recognizing that control feels safe, but too much of it suffocates. What makes us feel secure is not rigidity, but resilience, the capacity to adapt, to feel, to respond. Seed to plant control is not strength, it is fear in disguise. True resilience begins where control ends, and trust in life begins. Cracks in the order, no system of control is absolute. Even the most rigid structures contain weak points. Beneath the surface of surveillance, technocracy, and safety obsession, life refuses to be fully managed. Control cultures aim to suppress unpredictability. Yet unpredictability is what makes us human. It surfaces in laughter, in art, in love, in protest. Every time the script is broken, every time the data fails to predict, every time people refuse to comply quietly, a crack appears in the order. These cracks matter. They are reminders that the cage, however sophisticated, is never complete. Themes, the fragility of systems. The tighter the grip, the more fragile the system becomes. Attempts to eliminate uncertainty create brittleness, not resilience. Human unpredictability. Despite efforts to model and manage us, humans remain unpredictable. Creativity, intuition, and spontaneity cannot be coded away. Resistance in play and intimacy, moments of play, vulnerability, or authentic connection resist control by refusing efficiency. Love, laughter, and art do not obey procedure. Cracks as invitations. The fractures in order are not failures, they are openings. They show us that control is never total and that life keeps moving beneath. Attribute systemic fragility. The harder the order, the easier it shatters. Creative disruption, art, humor, and protest as unpredictable ruptures. Embodied defiance, intimacy, and vulnerability as rejections of control. Living openings, cracks in the order as signs of resilience. The human element history shows us that no system of control lasts forever. Surveillance states collapse under their own weight. Bureaucracies crumble when they can no longer adapt. Even technocratic orders meet their limits when life refuses to fit the model. At the individual level, I've seen people try to control every part of their lives after trauma. For a while it works, but inevitably something breaks through, a laugh, a cry, a burst of anger. The nervous system cannot remain rigid forever. At the societal level, the same applies. Despite censorship, voices rise. Despite repression, art emerges. Despite predictive models, humans surprise. The cracks are not accidents, they are inevitabilities. The Inversiverse touched on this in discussions of control theory. Overcorrection leads to instability. Push too hard for equilibrium and the system destabilizes. The very effort to eliminate chaos creates more of it. And for me personally, the cracks have often appeared in moments of recognition. Times when someone truly heard me, when art expressed what I could not, when laughter broke the tension in the middle of despair. In those moments, control loses its grip. The order fractures, life reasserts itself. Personal reflection. I felt this most powerfully in silence breaking moments. Times when someone dared to say what everyone else was holding back. Times when a piece of art captured what politics could not. Times when humor diffused fear. I remember feeling overwhelmed by the grip of safety culture, surveillance, and procedure. Yet a single unpredictable conversation, a friend saying aloud, "I see it too," cracked the illusion. Suddenly, I wasn't alone in carrying the weight. I've also seen these cracks at the cultural level. A referendum repeated until exhaustion, and yet people still resisted, voices still refusing to be silenced. Protest movements rising unexpectedly, catching governments off guard. These moments reminded me, no matter how strong the order seems, it is always incomplete. The cracks matter because they reveal something deeper. Control is never total, and life is never fully subdued. Psychological insight. At the individual level, trauma recovery research shows that rigidity inevitably breaks down. Somatic therapies emphasize how suppressed emotions eventually surface as spontaneous movement, tears, or bursts of feeling. The nervous system insists on release. At the group level, René Girard's theory of mimetic desire shows how conformity can fracture when new models of resistance appear. A single act of defiance can ripple outward, shifting collective behavior. At the societal level, complex systems theory teaches that tightly ordered systems are prone to collapse. Too much rigidity reduces adaptability, making systems brittle. History proves this, from empires that overextended to surveillance states that imploded when human unpredictability broke through. Together, these insights show that cracks are not weaknesses, they are inevitabilities. They are the places where life reclaims its space. Embodiment, prompt, or practice. Recall a time when laughter or art or love broke through fear or control in your life. Let yourself feel the shift it created in your body. Notice how unpredictability doesn't destroy you, it restores you. Insight prompt. Where have you seen cracks in cultural or political orders? Moments when the system tried to control, but unpredictability broke through? What did it teach you about the limits of control? Integration moment cracks in the order are not accidents. They are proof that life resists being reduced to numbers, routines, or surveillance. Integration here means recognizing that every act of unpredictability, every laugh, every act of intimacy, every protest is a refusal to be fully controlled. Seed to plant, the order will always crack. Life is unpredictable by design. Every fracture is proof that control is never complete. The work of living beyond the cage, if control has become culture, then living freely is not a default. It's a practice. To live beyond the cage means recognizing where safety has become smothering, where surveillance has become normalized, and where technocratic order has overridden voice. It does not mean rejecting all safety or all structure. It means learning to live with uncertainty again, to trust in chaos, to embrace risk, to make space for unpredictability. Freedom is not given, it is reclaimed breath by breath, choice by choice. Themes 1. Freedom as risk. Safety without risk is not safety, but stagnation. Freedom requires vulnerability, the willingness to step into the unknown. 2. Resilience over rigidity. True security does not come from control, but from adaptability. The capacity to bend, not the illusion of permanence, is what sustains life. 3. Reclaiming voice. Living beyond the cage means speaking even when it feels unsafe, even when cultural pressures silence. Voice itself becomes rebellion. 4. Human messiness as resistance. Intimacy, art, humor, creativity. These are not distractions but acts of resistance. They reintroduce what control seeks to eliminate, unpredictability and life. Attributes. Courageous risk, stepping into uncertainty without guarantees. Adaptive strength, building flexibility instead of rigid control. Unfiltered voice, reclaiming authenticity over self-policing. Messy humanity, honoring imperfection as freedom. The invisible prison, the cage of control is rarely visible. It is stitched into policies, procedures, devices, and norms. But cracks remind us it is not absolute, and the work of living beyond it begins when we choose to respond differently. I've learned that resilience is not about never feeling afraid, but about allowing uncertainty without collapsing into numbness. When I've spoken truths that others dismissed, I carried the exhaustion of not being recognized. But I also learned something else. The very act of speaking was resistance. Every time I used my voice, I weakened the cage's hold. Living beyond the cage is not about grand revolutions, though sometimes they come. It's about daily acts of unfiltered humanity, telling the truth, allowing unpredictability, creating art, laughing in the face of fear. Each act reintroduces chaos, the kind of chaos that makes life worth living. Personal reflection. For me, living beyond control has meant trusting risk again, choosing to share thoughts even when I knew they might be misunderstood, writing words that might never be recognized, speaking truths even when people roll their eyes. I've seen how exhausting silence can be, how people collapse under the weight of self-policing, how systems persist by wearing us down. But I've also seen how fragile that order really is. A single unpredictable act can break it. That's why I've learned to honor messiness, to value laughter that interrupts solemnity, to trust vulnerability even when it feels dangerous, to accept that real freedom is not tidy. It's unpredictable, uncontainable, alive. Psychological insight. At the individual level, Viktor Frankl's work reminds us that freedom lies in the gap between stimulus and response, the space where we choose how to act. Living beyond the cage begins in that space. At the group level, Paulo Freire's pedagogy of the oppressed highlights dialogue and critical voice as liberation. Where silence is imposed, speech itself is revolutionary. At the societal level, systems theory and complexity science show that adaptability, not rigidity, creates long-term resilience. Cultures thrive when they allow uncertainty, creativity, and disruption to flourish. Together, these insights affirm that freedom is not the absence of structure, but the courage to live in the unknown. Embodiment prompt or practice. Take one area of your life where you cling to control. Now loosen it. Allow for uncertainty. Let someone else take the lead, or let the outcome remain unknown. Feel the discomfort and notice the freedom inside it. Insight prompt. What is one risk you've been avoiding in the name of safety? How might stepping into it become an act of reclaiming freedom from control of culture? Integration moment. Living beyond the cage doesn't mean abolishing all safety or structure. It means refusing to let safety become suffocation, refusing to let procedure replace voice, refusing to let control masquerade as life. Integration here is simple but radical. Honor unpredictability, honor voice, honor messiness. This is the work of being human beyond control. Seed to plant. The cage of control was never complete. Every risk, every laugh, every act of truth is a step beyond its walls. Living beyond control as culture is seductive. It arrives as safety, as convenience, as progress. But beneath its promises lies suffocation. Surveillance normalised, technocracy entrenched, psychology harnessed, all designed to keep chaos at bay. Yet chaos is where life lives, risk is where freedom breathes, and unpredictability is where humanity thrives. In this episode, we've walked through the layers: the promise of safety, the normalization of surveillance, the spread of technocratic order, the psychology of control, the cracks in the system, and finally, the work of living beyond the cage. The lesson is clear: control is never absolute. The cracks are always there. And the work of freedom is to step into them, to speak, to laugh, to love, to create, to risk. You've been listening to the Unfiltered Human on the Fringe. And as always, stay unfiltered, stay human, and trust the cracks where freedom breathes. James Miller. If you found value in today's episode, you may also be interested in my broader project, The Inversiverse, a series exploring the hidden architecture of perception, identity, control, and consciousness. Across 20 episodes, The Inversiverse dissects indoctrination, language, media manipulation, dark psychology, belief systems, and the evolution of self in the digital age. You can find all episodes of The Inversiverse on Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, and Substack by searching this place called Earth. These ideas aren't shared to convince you, but to invite you to think, feel, and perceive more consciously in a world designed to keep you distracted. Overview of the Inversiverse, a journey through the mirrors of mind, culture, and control. Episodes 1 to 3 introduce foundational ideas around indoctrination, perception, and manipulation. Episode 4 explores how language, symbols, and cultural norms are used to shape thought. Episode 5 investigates control systems, media narratives, and the illusion of choice. Episodes 6 to 7 dives into collective belief structures and the psychology of mass behavior. Episode 8 focuses on marketing, control theory, game theory, and critical thinking. Episode 9 covers love, relationships, human mating, gender dynamics, and red-blue pill ideologies. Episode 10 unpacks dark psychology, the occult, Satanism, and the dark triad personality types. Episode 11 the simulated self examines identity, ego, and the rise of post-human consciousness. Episode 12 The Spell of the Mind inquires into language, illusion, and physiology of thought. Episode 13, Conscious Seduction, journeys through persuasion, propaganda, and the unseen forces of the mind. Episode 14, The Myth of Sanity sheds light on madness, genius, and the edge of perception. Episode 15, The Algorithmic Mind probes influence, identity, and invisible architects. Episode 16, The Noise of Knowing reveals overload, obsession, and the age of infinite information. Episode 17, Belief Machines delves further into language, desire, and the engine of reality. Episode 18, Submerged Signals examines how the unseen shapes the self. Episode 19, The Alchemy Within Traces, Food, Frequency, and the Forgotten Intelligence of the Body. Episode 20, Encoded Flesh scrutinizes and opens up to the forgotten language of the body, DNA, and biological consciousness.